Welcome to the Backseat Fighter Podcast. Here, my aim is simple. I want to bring back humility and honesty to combat sports media. As the name entails, I'm not a fighter. I've never made that walk, and nor will I ever claim to have done so. I will, however, do my best to provide honest assessments of both events and fighters. But my aim for this platform is to humanize these incredible fighters from all over the planet and contribute to healthy and respectful discussions that help grow combat sports. Thank you for watching. Welcome to episode 4 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. This week, we're talking about UFC 309 going down at MSG this weekend, the main event between Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic, a fight between two absolute legends of the sport, and obviously all the other fantastic fights on the card. And this week, we have another discussion, and it's about conduct of fans towards fighters, and especially about fans who need a reality check when it comes to how they behave towards fighters. Thank you for watching. So let's get into the main event of the evening, Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Now, this has to be said, and has to be said very clearly, that although this is for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world, there is certainly a disputed aspect of this fight with Tom Aspinall waiting in the wings to hopefully challenge the winner of this fight and try and unify this heavyweight division in the UFC. Now, this is Jon Jones' first real defense of his heavyweight championship since he took it in that win over Ciryl Gane, that first round submission, that dominant performance he showed after his 3-year layoff trying to put on that weight for the heavyweight division. And it was a super successful return. Obviously, he comes in, absolutely demolishes Ciryl Gane and claims that heavyweight title. Since then, we haven't seen him in the octagon, but this Saturday we see again the return of Jon Jones. And he's always coming, it is important to mention, he's coming off that pectoral tear, that complete tear of his pec that kept him out, I think, over a year, or at least since he was supposed to fight Stipe Miocic when it was first booked last year. So we're finally getting this fight, but the timing has come under a bit of controversy. But obviously this is a legendary fight because he's fighting a man in Stipe Miocic who is considered the consensus greatest heavyweight in the UFC history. And of course, a man who is a Croatian American, a firefighter, full-time now, but it was, the most dominant heavyweight champion that the sport has ever seen. This Stipe Miocic has 9 consecutive title fights. I don't think people realize that because a lot of the last memories that people have is Stipe Miocic losing to Francis Ngannou by brutal knockout in his most recent outing, which was, again, 3 years ago. So a lot of people have, been kind of turned off by this fight because they see it as two fighters that maybe should have fought a long time ago, but now is not an interesting fight. I disagree with that sentiment wholeheartedly, but I do believe, obviously, that we do need to see Tom Aspinall fight one of these guys at some point, and that will kind of be mentioned in my discussion section later in the podcast. But again, let's go through this main event. I'm going to go through Stipe Miocic first, and what I think his pathways to victories is, and also, what his weaknesses are that I think Jon Jones will look to exploit in this matchup that has now become personal. I just came back from the press conference, the pre-fight press conference between, there was Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic, there was Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler, and obviously Bo Nickal and Paul Craig. But Jon Jones mentioned that this fight has gotten personal. He said something that Stipe had mentioned his kids. I haven't seen that, but he definitely was very public about his distaste or disdain for Stipe Miocic, using the word bitch in his countdown episode towards Jon Jones. He's trying to make this fight personal, I think, to amp himself up and give him that killer, that competitive edge that he always has in the octagon, that mental resilience that has brought Jon Jones so far and kind of been the foundation for creating his case as the greatest of all time. But let's talk about Stipe Miocic in this fight. I think a lot of people, because our last memory is him getting knocked out, the fact that he's 42 years old, the fact that we haven't seen him in 3 years, a lot of people are counting him out of this fight completely. And I don't think that's necessarily correct. First of all, I think those 3 years off could be actually advantageous for Stipe in this fight. Obviously, ring rust is a thing. I do believe in it. I think staying active is the best way to guarantee or improve your chances of winning. I should say improve your chances of winning, not guarantee, because nothing is guaranteed in mixed martial arts. But, he also hasn't taken any damage since that knockout. And, I'm sure, there was a lot of sparring in his first training camp for Jon, and obviously maybe a little bit of damage in this training camp. But other than that, in professional combat, under a sanctioned bout by an athletic commission, he has not taken any damage, which I think is very important to mention. But more than anything, when you're talking about Stipe Miocic at heavyweight, you're talking about obviously the greatest heavyweight of all time, but you're talking about a knockout artist. And that started even before he won the belt off of Fabricio Verdum in that first round knockout, where he's kind of falling backwards and he just clips Fabricio Verdum and face plants him and puts him to sleep to win the title. I remember him knocking out or kind of ground and pounding Mark Hunt against the cage in that 5th round. I remember him knocking out Andrei Arlovski, I believe, in the 1st round. And then obviously he knocks out Fabricio Verdum in the 1st round, falling backwards for the title, and then goes on to beat, I think it was Alistair Overeem as well. And obviously that amazing trilogy he had with DC, where obviously in the first fight, he did get clipped exiting the clinch, which we will talk about as part of his weaknesses. But then he comes back in the second fight and uses immense fight IQ to, although he was losing those first couple of rounds of that fight, he uses his fight IQ to start going to the body, beautiful digging left hooks to the liver shot, and, ends up putting DC away and finishing him in that fight. And obviously comes back for the trilogy, wins the unanimous decision. But I think when we're talking about the keys to victory for Stipe Miocic, we're not just talking about knockout power. We're talking about things that maybe we've seen Jon Jones be a little bit vulnerable to, especially towards the end of his tenure in the light heavyweight division when he was still champ. I think about that Dominic Reyes performance. A lot of people came out of that fight thinking Dominic Reyes deserved to win on the judges' scorecards. I know Dana White, although he's the biggest fan of Jon Jones you will find, he came out after that fight and said he thought Dominic Reyes won. I think he's kind of gone back on that statement now. But in that fight, Dominic Reyes had great success in kind of pushing Jon Jones, trying to put that pressure on him and throw combinations towards the head. Make sure you're trying to connect. And Jon Jones does get hit. He's got a good defense and he's got a great chin, but he does receive blows to the head and does receive contact. So I'm looking for Stipe in this fight to throw a bunch of combinations. It's at heavyweight. He's a bigger man than Jon Jones. He weighs, I think, 20 to 30 pounds heavier on fight night. He's going to be able to connect with Jon. And he's got to make sure he's pressuring Jon all the way up against the cage so he can keep landing those big shots. And you never know. We haven't seen Jon Jones take big shots in this weight class. And I think that's going to be a huge advantage for Stipe. I think he's probably taking a lot of confidence in that self-belief that, this is my division. I ruled this for a long time. I'm a bigger man than Jon. Everybody's underestimating me. He's underestimating me. He's talking about Alex Pereira. He's talking about, Derek Lewis and Jamal Hill and fun fights after this. And, he's probably thinking, Jon's already thought he's won and I'm going to show him and I'm going to be the underdog again. And, Stipe is always an underdog. He always finds himself up against it in terms of the belief of the public and Vegas. So Stipe is going to be looking to push him up and try and take that fight to him, take the fight to Jon, make him uncomfortable. Don't give him the space. Don't let him control the range with his beautiful teep kicks and oblique kicks that we'll talk about when we come to Jon's path to victories in this fight. And I think he's got to use his fight IQ like he did in that second fight against DC. This is a really smart fighter with a really smart team and coaches, and he's able to make adjustments in the middle of the fight. So I don't necessarily believe that if the fight starts really well for Jon, that it's just going to keep going like that. I think Stipe is definitely going to have moments. I think there is going to be windows that he can exploit and look to win the fight. And, whether that is going to the body, whether that is, being able to get the foot on the outside and pressure Jon, whether that's be able to close the distance and really throw multiple punch combinations at Jon's head to disorientate him. And if he can stuff the takedowns, he's got great wrestling and just use his size and his strength. I think this is going to be a great opportunity for Stipe Miocic to show his fight IQ and maybe shock the world. Now, when it comes to the weaknesses for Stipe, there's two things. I think the low kicks are going to be a problem. I forget exactly which fight it was. He was getting low kicked a lot. I think it was the JDS fight. I think against Junior Dos Santos, Junior only landed about 2 calf kicks and it completely swelled up Miocic's leg and really paralyzed his movement. I think Miocic realized the urgency of the leg situation, and that's why he put on the pressure and was able to really, urgently get JDS, Junior Dos Santos, out of the fight and come out with a win, which ended up, being very dominant. But Junior had success with the low kick, so I'm expecting Jon to, start calf kicking and really attack that lead leg of Miocic, just slow down his movement and then obviously look to go upstairs, especially like, how he did with DC in that second fight, go low, go low, go low with the kicks and then throw out the head kick. So I do think that's a weakness. And also DC mentioned in his analysis that he did with Jon Anik, because obviously nobody knows these two fighters better than DC. He shared the cage 3 times with Stipe and twice with Jon Jones. And he said that one of Stipe's weaknesses was that he's not very good at exiting the clinch. He puts himself in danger when he's leaving those clinch positions. So I'm going to be looking at Stipe to try and kind of do what he improved in that second and third DC fight, which is what DC said, was that he stopped exiting the clinch. He stayed in the clinch and improved in that position and, made those positions advantageous for himself. So he was able to damage his opponent. So I'm looking for Stipe to not only, show what he showed in those last 2 DC fights where he was able to stay in the clinch and kind of win those positions, but also, if he does have to exit the clinch, show great defense and show great fight IQ, which I think he's definitely capable of. But I do believe Jon Jones will be looking at that thinking, I'm going to exploit that. Let me go to Jon Jones here. This is Jon Jones's 17th straight title fight. He obviously has that one loss to Matt Hamill, which ended up being obviously a disqualification for a 12-6 elbow, which is now legal. So even today at the press conference, Dana White kind of admitted defeat about the Athletic Commission being able to turn that result over to a no contest and to get an O on Jon's record. But really and practically speaking, Jon Jones is an undefeated fighter. He's never lost inside the UFC octagon. And, he hasn't lost in 17 consecutive title fights. I think the biggest key to this is Jon Jones's fight IQ, because he is giving up a little bit of size coming up to heavyweight. He was, I think, 248 pounds when he debuted in heavyweight against Cyril Gane. I think he's come a little bit down. I think he's around 235. He's around 235 now, and he has come in a little bit lighter. But I do think his fight IQ is just a level above every other fighter on the roster, and I think most people would agree with that. Furthermore, I think he does get a certain kick, even since he was a young fighter when he debuted. I believe at 21 years old inside of the UFC, he's the youngest champion ever. I do think he gets a little kick out of defeating legends. He defeated every legend of the sport: Shogun Rua, Lyoto Machida, Rampage Jackson. The list goes on and on and on. But I think when I think of that legend killer moment, I do think of that Lyoto Machida kind of, he drops him, gets him up the fence and submits him on the feet with a choke and just drops his carcass down on the canvas. It's one of the most devastating, dominant finishes I've ever seen in a fight. And for me, that's the most Jon Jones performance, if that makes sense. But let me talk about how I see Jon Jones winning this fight if he is going to win. Again, we spoke about Stipe Miocic's weakness when he's exiting the clinch. I believe that Jon Jones has seen that, and I think he's going to go for those clinch positions and try and use those hellbows, as he calls them, on the exit. So he's going to be trying to get to those positions, make Stipe want to leave and get out of those exchanges and try and throw those elbows. So I believe, what Jon has to do is get into that clinch, and Stipe is going to want to stay there because he doesn't want to exit the clinch and risk himself taking that damage on exit. But Jon's got to throw those knees up into the middle of the body, try and get that damage inside the clinch, maybe throw some short elbows, sweep him, do anything to make him uncomfortable in that clinch position so that Stipe doesn't want to be there the next time they're in that position, and then start throwing the elbows on the exit. I think, as we said, Stipe is probably going to be looking at that Dominic Reyes performance, probably going to be looking at the people that have had success against Jon Jones, like Thiago Santos. It's about that pressure, not giving Jon that space to throw those, oblique kicks, throw those teep kicks to the lead leg. He throws kind of some brutal techniques that, really could injure you and end your career in terms of injuring your knees. And I think Jon's got to look for those teeps and obliques. He's got to look for a way to kind of slow down and discourage Stipe Miocic from entering a range that's beneficial to Stipe and, detrimental to Jon Jones's chances of winning that fight. And again, I think he's going to be looking to go to that calf kick, go to that leg kick of Stipe. He probably seen Junior Dos Santos' performance, seen that he's vulnerable to those leg kicks, and of course, absolutely go for the head kicks like he did to DC and try and get Stipe out of there. But I do believe that a lot of this fight might play out on the ground with, John initiating the clinch and taking Stipe down and trying to ground and pound and throw those elbows like he does, probably the most vicious elbows we've seen in MMA history, in my opinion, at least in the UFC. And of course, John actually has sneaky hands. A lot of people, I saw the Believe You Me podcast boys, Michael Bisping, Anthony Smith, Harrington, great inspiration for me doing this podcast. To be honest, I actually saw Michael Bisping today, and even people like Adam Catterall and Nick Pete, who are big inspirations for me, the Fight Disciples podcast. I saw them all today. But, a lot of people, and they were saying on the Believe You Me podcast before I got sidetracked, that Jon Jones doesn't have power. I mean, Anthony Smith has been in there with him, and Anthony Smith has sparred a lot with Stipe Miocic, and he has said that Jon Jones doesn't really have power in the hands. And whilst he doesn't have that one-shot knockout power that you usually expect when we're talking about UFC stars, he does have sneaky hands. I mean, we think of that Lyoto Machida performance, and we think of that choke up against the cage, and he just drops Lyoto. But what happened before that? He hit him with some punches on the feet that actually dropped Lyoto, made him disorientated, and made that choke easier to kind of cinch in, and that's how he got to that position. So I do believe John kind of sets up his punches with a bunch of different, arsenal, or a bunch of different weapons that he has in his arsenal. And, he's not going to, his main idea is not to outbox you, but he's going to use all of his other tools that you don't even expect the crisp punches that he can land, because this is a really, really, really smart fighter. When I think about the weaknesses of Jon Jones in this fight, like I said, he does take shots. He does take damage. And, we've never seen John at heavyweight take shots. I think a lot of people, there has been a lot of revisionist history when it comes to that Ciryl Gane fight where Jon Jones claimed the heavyweight strap. A lot of people did think that Ciryl Gane threatened Jones on the feet and could cause him problems on the feet. But we saw John just take him down, submit him like it was nothing. But Stipe does have a bit more of a wrestling pedigree. And I do believe that, he obviously hits harder than Ciryl Gane. So I do think it presents a problem to John that he can't risk taking a lot of bombs off Stipe Miocic, because although Jones is the GOAT, we've seen the greatest chins in UFC history get cracked. Chuck Liddell eventually got cracked. Mark Hunt eventually got cracked. We've seen, Max Holloway against Ilia Topuria eventually get cracked. Everybody's human at the end of the day, and I don't think anybody can take clean shots off Stipe Miocic over and over and over again. But that's going to basically lead me to my prediction. This is really hard for me to predict. I think I definitely thought Jon Jones was going to win absolutely dominantly, 100%. You couldn't have convinced me otherwise until fight week. And I've done a lot of tape study. I've done a lot of listening to both sides and experts. And I do believe that Stipe has a lot more of a chance than people are giving him credit for. There is still a bunch of questions that Jon Jones needs to answer as a heavyweight. Not as a mixed martial artist. Do not come after me. People watching this video, I'm not saying that John hasn't proven himself. I don't believe if Jon Jones retired after this fight, I wouldn't have a problem with that necessarily. And we're going to talk about that in the discussion, because it has a lot to do with fan conduct that I saw at the press conference today. But my pick for this fight above everything is still going to be Jon Bones Jones, or as he wants to be called, I think it's John Meat Jones now because he's a heavyweight, I do believe that Jon Jones is still going to be able to come out of this fight victorious. And, at the end of the day, when we're talking about Jon Jones, we're not talking about, an average fighter. We're talking about possibly the greatest combat athlete that we've ever seen. He's never lost inside the octagon. He's great at taking a shot. He's figured out every opponent, really. I know Dominic Reyes gave him trouble. That's what I think about most in terms of when did he look most vulnerable. But I do believe that he's going to be able to take this fight to the ground. He's going to be able to use all of his techniques, all of his weapons in his arsenal to kind of stop the pressure of Miocic and use those teeps, use those leg kicks, and get in that clinch, fire those elbows, fire those knees up the middle, sweep, take Miocic to the ground, and kind of dominate him from the top position. Now, do I believe that Stipe Miocic poses the biggest threat to Jon Jones that we've ever seen? I do believe so. And that, more than anything, is a compliment to Stipe Miocic as one of those guys, one of those killers that we have in the sport. And, he is on the older side. He's 42 years old. And I do believe that 3 years off has or will have helped him more than, necessarily fighting all the time. As long as he stayed in shape, which I believe he has. He looked great in the photos, in the promotional photos for this week, for this fight week. So I do believe that he's in good shape. And I do believe that we're going to see a great fight this weekend. But Jon Jones coming out on top, either by, ground and pound finish or submission or by points. I don't know the exact way because I do believe this fight could go either way. And I wouldn't necessarily be the most shocked in my life if Stipe is able to pull this off. Moving on to the co-main event of the evening, an absolute banger of a fight, a rematch in the lightweight division between Charles do Bronx Oliveira and Iron Michael Chandler. Obviously, we've seen this fight before play out when they both fought for the vacant lightweight championship of the world. We saw Michael Chandler drop Charles Oliveira, be very, very close to ground and pound, finishing him, and the ref jumping in. But Charles Oliveira shows that heart that's made him such a star in the UFC. And, is able to come back, drops Michael Chandler with the left hook as he exits the exchange after throwing a body shot. So Michael Chandler throws the body shot, comes up, doesn't protect himself appropriately. Charles Oliveira lands a perfect left hook. And from there, just follows him across the cage, lands the kill shots, and becomes lightweight champion of the world and probably one of the biggest, most loved stars we've ever seen in the sport. But let's talk about this fight. It's completely different in terms of the context in which both fighters are coming into this fight. We've seen Charles Oliveira obviously coming off a loss to Arman Tsarukyan. He looked quite good in that fight, but obviously wasn't able to win the fight on the judges' scorecard just purely based on the fact that he wasn't able to do as much damage outside of those really threatening submission attempts that maybe some people count more than others. And obviously Michael Chandler, a lot of context, a lot of, detail and important information go into the context in which he's entering this fight. At 38 years old, he's quite old for the lightweight division to be fighting at this elite level against an opponent like Charles Oliveira. But why is he coming in after 2 years out of the cage? We all know that he was waiting for Conor McGregor to kind of show up, basically. They recorded The Ultimate Fighter 31. They finished that show, and, Conor McGregor was supposed to be re-entered into the USADA testing cycle, supposed to be able to get into the ring much earlier than he ever did. They eventually signed to fight, and that was for, I believe, this past summer. And, Conor McGregor pulls out with a toe injury, and Chandler, again, feels like he probably wasted 2 years of his career. But maybe similar to Miocic, I think it could benefit him. Now, at the lighter weight, the older you get, the much, much harder it is to win a strap, to win a title, to win the elite fights, because it's based so much more on speed, reactions, agility, and things like that. But Michael Chandler still has all those things. I truly believe that if you look at the way this guy works out and the way this guy performs in the octagon, and the athleticism, pure natural athleticism that he has, and the discipline that he showed to keep those natural talents that he has, I still believe he has that, but I do believe that 2 years break where he's not necessarily taking the damage that he takes in fights. You look at that Justin Gaethje fight, that one fight of the year, took immense damage, and that was also at MSG, took immense damage. Dustin Poirier fight, took immense damage. Charles Oliveira fight, the first time round, gets knocked out, takes damage. Maybe 2 years off has given him some time to heal, given him time to revamp, and, more than anything, I think this fight week, Chandler has said, I'm coming in a different fighter. I'm coming in with a different approach. I'm coming in to be more calculated, more IQ-based, more patient while I'm in there, and really go for the win instead of just purely entertaining the fans. Now, as the fans, we love to see Michael Chandler fight the way he does because he provides the best, most electrifying fights, usually of the night and possibly of the year. This is one of the best, most entertaining lightweights in the world. I actually had the pleasure of meeting him at the Hard Rock Cafe on Broadway. He was doing a promotional event for his tequila, and he was a nice guy. He gave us his time, took photos with us. I'll put the photo here, and I made a little story, and it was actually really great because I had made a video that day trying to manifest meeting my first UFC fighter ever, and that was Iron Michael Chandler. But let me get into why or the keys, I believe, for Chandler winning this fight. Let me go into Chandler first, and then we'll go into Charles. So, more than anything, Michael Chandler is a true warrior, an entertainer, and a man who's going to bleed in the octagon for not only the enjoyment of the fans, but that's just who he is. He's going to put it all on the line every single time, go for it 150%, put everything into every single shot, and try and just get his opponent out of there. And it's probably one of the most entertaining fight styles we've ever seen in the UFC, especially for a guy who came into the UFC quite late after being, champion in Bellator and an established mixed martial artist in his own right, to come and have this career he's had so far in 6 fights in the UFC, 3 times in MSG. There's nothing you can really say in terms of an entertainment and fan-friendly aspect. But in order to win this fight against a guy who's already beaten him, but one of the best lightweights ever, the most finishes in the sport, the most submissions in the sport, I believe, this is a time where he's going to need, I believe, to take just 10% off of that mentality, off the power, off the lunging into shots, and, just using all of his energy, those pure explosive movements. If he can just take 10% off of those, I do believe that that's going to help him significantly in this fight to kind of control the pace of the fight a little bit more, pick his shots, because he was very, very close to finishing Charles Oliveira. And in every fight he's had success. He rocked Gaethje. He landed great shots against Dustin Poirier. He obviously KO'd Dan Hooker. These obviously that knockout of the year, front kick up the middle to the jaw of Tony Ferguson. This is a guy who has finishing ability, but I believe if he's going to get these fighters out of here, he's just got to be a little bit more calculated. But at the same time, you really don't want to take that full personality out of him. But I do believe if you can just take 10% off of, those shots, those movements, his decision making, in just terms of the explosive movement, I do believe that he has an avenue to success in this fight. And he's definitely a threat. He's a threat to all people he's in the octagon with because he's just so powerful. As Joe Rogan said, the consequences of Michael Chandler hitting you are just so extreme. Now let's move on to one of my personal favorite fighters of all time. Going to the press conference today and seeing him in real life for the first time, the amount of support he got in the crowd. Michael Chandler's the American. He's put on great shows at MSG, but Charles Oliveira was the star of the show. Everybody was on their feet when he came out. When he said something, everybody was cheering for him. He was wearing that red suit, great style as always. But for me, the key to Charles Oliveira is kind of similar to Michael Chandler in the terms of the overall concept of just be yourself, be what made you the fighter you are. But for Charles, instead of taking 10% off of that, which I feel like he did against Arman Tsarukyan, he kind of took a more measured approach. He needs to go back to just full pressure and getting into those, high consequence, high impact, high risk exchanges, because he is a guy that's always or most of the time going to win those, right? And he's willing to put it all on the line. He needs to use that pressure that he's used in all of his amazing performances, push Chandler up against the cage and get into the beautiful Muay Thai clinches that he's so effective in with those knees up the middle. I think for me, in the clinch, Charles Oliveira has the best knees in the UFC. The way he's able to really put a lot of power and a lot of vim into those shots to the midsection that helps slow down his opponent so much. I think about that Dustin Poirier performance when he beat Dustin Poirier in that championship bout. In that moment, I realized, wow, like he's really digging those knees and body shots that really slow his opponent down and give him such a big advantage when it comes to those wild exchanges, because he's just got more in the tank and he's been hurt less and damaged less. And it's just that shoot box style, I believe. And when I talk about Chandler and taking that 10% off and kind of being a more measured approach that he's himself talked about in the media with TNT, with Adam Catterall, with Ariel Hawani on his show, he said it all week that he's trying to be a little bit more calculated. If Charles Oliveira can land those body kicks and make him tired, cardio doesn't wait for anybody. Cardio is unforgiving. If you can get somebody tired, they're going to revert to all of their worst habits. So I think for Charles, he's got to be looking for those body shots, got to be, looking to tire Michael Chandler out and making him revert to that Michael Chandler we all know that puts it all on the line and maybe leaves himself a little bit more vulnerable than his head coach, Henry Hoof, would want him to be. My official pick for this fight is Charles Oliveira I believe he's going to start damaging him to the body with those knees, getting to those clinch exchanges, and, maybe follow him down. And similarly to last time, maybe ground and pound him out. Or I do see very likely a submission where Charles gets Michael Chandler's back and goes for the rear naked choke or something to that effect. And, this is a banger of a fight. It's a great co-main event to set up the anticipation of the main event. And I just think we're very, very lucky to have that fight on this card at MSG. But I do think Charles the Bronx Oliveira is going to win that fight and go on to be the next challenger for maybe Islam Makhachev or Arman Tsarukyan, whoever comes out on top in that fight. Right now, I do believe that might be Islam, but you never know. Arman did give Islam a very difficult fight the first time. And then for Michael Chandler, where does he go from there? I think that Conor McGregor fight would still be available, even if he wins or loses. But if he wins this fight, being able to take that 10% off, more approach measure, and more pick his shots better, and get Charles Oliveira out of there, that too propels him into a title shot. And I think he's also said that he plans to fight Conor McGregor in March if McGregor is ready, which I do not believe will happen at this point. I think McGregor is done with fighting, if I'm honest with you. But yes, Charles Oliveira by stoppage. That's what I see happening. And great fight. So let's move on to the fight between Bo Nickal and Paul Craig. I mean, to me, this is a really, really interesting fight because obviously you've got Bo Nickal, who the UFC are trying to build. He's been so dominant, like the biggest betting favorite in his fight of all time, I believe. He had that great performance where he knocked out Valentine, I believe his name is. And obviously that dominant performance against Cody Brundage, which he wasn't even happy with because he wanted to get him out quicker. I mean, Bo Nickal is a very dominant, high level, high competitive athlete. And he's coming up against a veteran here in Paul Craig, who I have immense respect for. He's fought the best of the best. Obviously, he's coming off a loss to one of the fighting nerds, Cal Borrello, and, a submission loss to Brendan Allen. But, this is a man that, in the light heavyweight division at least, fought the best of the best and submitted Ankalaev, who's probably the number one contender right now for Alex Pereira. And he beat, obviously, Jamal Hill, broke his arm, who again, became champion. So this is a guy who can beat anybody. And I believe that he does have at least more of a chance than the betting odds give him at the moment, especially with a wrestler. I feel like, if you get into the guard of Paul Craig, it's a dangerous guard and anything can happen. He can throw up that triangle and get you out of there. And he's done it to the best of them. So I do believe that Paul Craig has much more of a chance than people are giving credit for, and at least Vegas and the betting odds are giving him credit for. But when you talk about Bo Nickal, you're talking about a super, super high level wrestler. And, the fact that he joined up, I think, with American Top Team and looks really good on the feet. Doesn't have the cleanest striking ever, but he's got great footwork, great in and out management. He's able to enter the pocket and get out effectively, and he's fast and very athletic. And of course, in his wrestling exchanges, he's one of the best college wrestlers of all time, and his ability to control his opponents in the wrestling exchanges is immense. So I do believe that, this is an interesting fight because Paul Craig likes being on his back. He likes being taken down. He kind of invites people into his guard. He wants people to take him down, and so he can throw up submissions off of his back. And, I do believe that Bo Nickal is probably going to win this fight, but I would not be surprised at all if Paul Craig is able to get a submission against Bo Nickal. I have immense respect for Paul Craig, how he approaches fighting, how he talks, and just how he represents himself and where he comes from. And I think it's going to be a great fight. I think it's a good fight for Bo Nickal to be so high up on the card. I think this is the most exposure he's probably had in his young career so far. But Bo Nickal is an undefeated prospect who, needs to be fighting guys of this caliber, guys with big names. And I think the UFC has built him up in the right way, kind of slowly and slowly but surely, I should say. And I think it's a big step up for him. And I'm expecting him to put on a good performance and come out with a win. Whether that's a finish, I do believe that's possible, maybe by ground and pound or something like that. Moving on to the next fight on the card, which is Karine Silva versus Viviane Aruajo. Now, I really, really am excited for this fight because I am a huge admirer of Karine Silva. I think she's an absolute beast. She's obviously an alum of the Dana White Contender Series, but her submission game, her guard is the most entertaining grappling. Oftentimes I think the casual fan and sometimes even, the hardcore fans get a little bit tired and jaded with the grappling exchanges, especially when you see like a Merab style that maybe might not be the favorite style for a lot of people, especially in that Sean O'Malley title fight, or that Mario Batista fight in the Jose, or the Mario Batista style performance in the Jose Aldo fight recently. But this is a person who's going to grapple and going to grapple to get the finish every single time. I think about her dash choke against Botelho, and even in that fight, she's able to set up, those ground exchanges because she does have a great 1-2 on the feet. Now, she does overextend a little bit on the right hand, so she throws a jab and she does kind of fall over herself into that right hand and can leave herself exposed, which I think Aruajo may be looking at saying, okay, she's going to throw that 1-2 to try and, win some exchanges on the feet because she's not afraid of exchanging on the feet. But she's going to leave herself a little bit exposed when she throws that 1-2. But if it lands, it's a great 1-2, and it can lead to, getting down to that ground game quicker where she's dangerous, man. I mean, her dash chokes, I think she has a lot of submissions. I think she had like I want to say something like 6 fights in a row where she won by submission. And, I'm expecting big things from Silva. Now, Aruajo, obviously, I think she's coming off a loss, but I think the last time I saw her was when she fought Talita at UFC 237. Who was it? It must have been 237. And she has a nasty overhand. And I do believe that she's going to be able to land that overhand. I do think that Silva's going to be able to take it and going to be able to get down to that, I think she'll be able to get down to the ground and really submit Aruajo. And I just think she has this grappling style. She has that dog where she just snatches the neck. I remember in her Dana White Contender Series fight, if you go back and watch that fight, her debut as a Dana White Contender Series fighter, the way she's able to snatch the neck and rip and kind of cinch in that tight, I think it was a guillotine. She's really dangerous. And I believe she's going to come out on top and get another submission here. Even though Araujo's never been submitting in her career, I don't believe. I think maybe Silva's going to be able to come out here and get submission or at least finish the fight in some way. Now, the last fight on the main card, I am extremely excited for. This is a fight with one of the fighting nerds again. It's Mauricio Ruffy versus James Llontop. Let me talk a little bit about Mauricio Ruffy. Now, this is a guy that I didn't know much of, but I watched his fight against Jamie Mullarkey, and honestly, just the way he fights, and Dean Thomas says it on commentary in that fight, he looks like a prime Conor McGregor in the way that he's able to kind of have that bladed karate stance and land devastating shots. I think he's 10-1. All of his wins have come by knockout or TKO. And, I really believe that this Fighting Nerds team have found something special in their killer mentality. Carlos Prates last week, and obviously throughout his last, 8 fights or whatever win streak he's on, showing the ability to devastatingly finish opponents. And I think obviously Mauricio Ruffy shows kind of the same threats, but he's able to, switch stances better than Conor McGregor did, I believe. But he does have that bladed stance, the ability to see shots coming, just pull slightly out of range. So a punch grazes his nose and fires a counter. And obviously we saw that amazing leg sweep takedown that he threatened James Mullarkey with in that fight. This is a really serious fighter who I believe is going to the top. But speaking of top, Llontop is a fighter who was in Fusion Fighting Championship. And if people don't know Fusion Fighting Championship, it's, a decent regional promotion. This guy actually trains with, a big team over there, who actually includes Oscar Ravelo, who I was going to have on this podcast. I'm hoping to have on the podcast, who's actually the champion of the welterweight division over there in Fusion Fighting Championship. And, he was a beast in Fusion Fighting Championship, Llontop, but he struggled to find his feet a little bit in the UFC. I think he's on a 2-fight loss streak. And, this is a huge opportunity for him because Ruffy is coming in off great performances, only lost 1 time. And if he's able to get a win of a Ruffy, if he's able to somehow expose some weaknesses of Ruffy's game, which, to be honest, I think Ruffy is one of the best fighters we've seen in this new era of mixed martial arts. But, I'm expecting huge things from Mauricio Ruffy. I think he's going to come out and get another knockout. And I think we're going to see probably the most entertaining fight of the night in terms of a single performance, maybe a performance of the night. in this Ruffy Llontop fight, and that's going to be by the Brazilian, who is part of this fighting nerds wave that are just taking over the sport at the moment. You've got Gene Silva, Carlos Prates, Calbaralo, and now Mauricio Ruffy. And if I'm missing anyone, please forgive me. But, you know, they're I think we're in for a real treat with that fight. And if any of you haven't watched Ruffy fight, just go on YouTube or go wherever you watch your fights and find that Ruffy performance against Jamie Mullarkey, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So to kind of summarize all of the picks in the end, we're going Jon Jones, we're going Charles Oliveira, we're going Bo Nickal, we're going Silva, and then we're going Ruffy. And there's a couple other fights that I'd love to talk about, which are on the prelims. We've got Tybura versus Diniz, which I will just speak about quickly. Obviously, I have huge respect for Tybura. He's a good veteran. He's really well-rounded. He can win by submission. He can knock you out. He can, do a lot of things in the octagon. But I really believe in this Diniz kid, especially in his ability to dominate on the feet from his kickboxing background. Diniz was supposed to fight Derek Lewis very recently before Derek Lewis had to pull out due to medical reasons. And, they've matched him up against somebody who I think is probably, obviously not as big of a name as Derek Lewis, but a very, very good test. Tybura is somebody who's fought Tom Aspinall. And, he's been in there with the best of them. So if he can beat Tybura, I believe that kind of puts him on a trajectory where we're really looking at a serious heavyweight here. And I really believe that he's got all the skills to put himself in the top ranking positions of that division. So I'm just going to mention that fight. Obviously, we've got Chris Weidman on the card. We've got Jim Miller on the card. But I am just going to mention that fight quickly. I do believe Diniz is going to win by finish. But that's going to resume my picks. And we're going to transition now into the discussion topic this week. So the discussion topic this week is going to be about something that I witnessed at the press conference today, the UFC 309. And it's about fans' conduct towards fighters and the reality check that people need when it comes to being at a press conference, being a consumer of the UFC, being a fan of the UFC, attending these free events, and just the way they're communicating to fighters. Listen, I get being a fan. I get the fan aspect of, shouting obscene things, whether it's at a referee or whether it's at a player. That happens. And sometimes it does cross a line. And when it crosses that line, sometimes you think, well, that's just part of it. But to be honest, when we're talking about athletes, we're not just talking about people on a TV or people that are just wearing a shirt or just kind of faceless performers. We're talking about real human beings who have emotions, feelings, people watching, family watching, and probably have to answer a lot of questions about when they come home to their family about why people are saying that about their loved ones, especially I feel like from kids, maybe. If fighters have kids, maybe they have to answer questions like that. But what I'm talking about is, especially in fighting, the way fans talk to the fighters at the press conference. We were sitting, me and some friends, in front of a couple of guys who kept making comments towards Jon Jones. And, a lot of them had to do with his suspensions, whether that be through some, legal issues that he's had or controversies that he's had in terms of, some Vegas things and stories that had come out between his personal relationships between him and his wife, and, just a bunch of things. And listen, I don't think anybody would want to necessarily defend a lot of the things that Jon Jones has done in his past. But at the same time, you can't cross a line in fighting, because when we're talking about fan conduct towards fighters in real life, they would never say that. If they saw Jon Jones in the street or they went to a meet and greet with Jon Jones, 9 times out of 10, maybe 10 times out of 10, they're not going to go up to Jon Jones to his face and say these things. Now, 16 rows up in the Madison Square Garden Theater with a stage and media separating fans and the fighters, and Dana White up there and Hunter Campbell and all the production staff and all the things going on. Fans might feel like it's a safe space to start, abusing the fighters on stage. But I do not believe that there's any place for that, and especially in terms of fighting, because these are professional trained killers, right? And I know for a fact a lot of these fans would never say that to any of these guys if they were given the opportunity face to face. Now, he doesn't just go for Jon Jones. Even Stipe Miocic, when he was saying things, people were telling him to shut the F up. And for example, when Paul Craig was talking, obviously he's got a thick Scottish accent, which isn't illegible. Everyone can understand what he's saying, but people saying, "What are you saying?" when he's trying to talk, and all of these things. I get it. There's jovial festivities, but with fighting, just because of the nature of the sport and the sacrifices and who these guys are, the killers that they are, and the deserved label of calling them killers, like not just killers because they have the ability to end someone's life, but their mentality, their discipline, their effort, what they do, the way they put it all on the line, the consequences of not just losing the sport, but also winning. You can win a fight and take damage and years off your life. In NBA, you can win or lose and your life goes on. Emotionally, it might suck, but there's not physical damage to the brain that you're taking, right? So I guess what's the remedy? That becomes a question. How can you stop that? Well, I feel like the remedy is spaces like this, the Backseat Fighter Podcast, where we can really talk about the sport in a mature and healthy manner that helps grow it. So that, of course, I do believe that there's a space for fans to express themselves and chat towards fighters and make jokes and comments. I do believe that's an important part of sports because I feel like fans do need to be involved. But when it comes to fighters at a press conference 2 days before a fight, during their weight cuts, obviously not for Jon Jones and Stipe because they're at heavyweight, but Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler. I think Michael Chandler got told to shut the F up very loudly. And these are just very disrespectful things towards these fighters who are putting it all on the line. And, not even necessarily smart comments or funny. I think a lot of fighters can respect, critical, and I'm saying that in quotes, critical comments if there's some sort of, harmless humor in it. But yes, I do believe that fans often cross the lines. And I think it's kind of a symptom of the age we're living in, especially at this digital age and this generation where a lot of people feel like it's okay to talk really badly about people and kind of insult people to their face, or people feel like they're allowed to insult people because there's some sort of protection that's in the way. And I know that we should not conduct ourselves as fans or media, as anybody talking about a fighter or any athlete in general, as if they're not human or they're not real or they can't talk to you, or if it was in a different situation, they wouldn't come up to you and, slap the words right out your mouth. So yes, what am I saying? Fans who act indecently and insult fighters at press conferences without any sort of genuine humor or comedy to what they're saying, you need a reality check, because you would never say those things to a fighter's face. You would never say those things to Jon Jones' face. You would never say those things to Michael Chandler or Paul Craig, and you'd most likely be taking pictures of them and begging for their attention. So that's going to do it for this episode. Oh, no, it's not. We've got to talk a little bit about Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall, because but we've got to talk. But the reason this is all a big thing for me is because we've got to talk about why people were saying that to Jon Jones at this press conference. Now, do I believe people crossed the line? Absolutely, 100%. But what was their motivation for saying it, perhaps? Well, it's because Jon Jones's first defense of his heavyweight title has come under controversy because he's not fighting the interim champion in the division, who has more title defenses than him so far in the weight class. Tom Aspinall deserves to fight Jon Jones, not only for all the work he's put in, but the fact that he's the interim champion and defended it, and, is the biggest threat to Jon Jones that I believe he has ever had to think about in his career. And Jon Jones won't fight him. All fight week, he's been making explanations about why he doesn't want to fight Tom Aspinall. And I completely understand a lot of it. If Jon Jones really, like you were saying in the build up to this fight, was thinking about retirement and this being his last one, then I completely understand the fact that he doesn't need to fight Tom Aspinall. If he wants to go out happy on a win against Stipe Miocic, feels like he has nothing left to prove. He doesn't. That's a fact. He doesn't have anything left to prove. But the caveat is, now this fight week, he's saying, I am going to stick around, but I only want to stick around for Alex Pereira. Then it comes out he does want to stick around, and it's for Alex Pereira or Jamal Hill or Derek Lewis, of all people. and he's called those fun fights, and he wants to relinquish the heavyweight belt. And I do understand, there's two ways I'm looking at this. John is looking to negotiate with the UFC to try and get more money for them to pay him more to fight Tom Aspinall. He's noted and himself credited Tom Aspinall as the most dangerous, most threatening fighter at the moment for him in his career. But playing Tom Aspinall down like he is like Johnny Walker or like Cyril Garn or Dominic Reyes, like Tom Aspinall is a generational heavyweight. We've never seen a heavyweight that fast who is so well-rounded, has the knockout power he has, and the ground game to go with it. I mean, he comes from a jiu-jitsu background, right? So that's why I do believe this fight with Stipe Miocic is a little bit overshadowed by the controversy of the fact that Tom Aspinall is not in there with one of them, and the fact that Jon Jones, at least insofar as what he said during fight week, won't fight Tom Aspinall, right? And it does a little bit of disservice to Jon Jones's argument about legacy, because he says, Tom Aspinall doesn't have enough titles. Well, that's because you're holding up the division, John. And he wants to fight Alex Pereira instead. Now, I do understand that the Alex Pereira fight is attractive for John. I think that's an attractive fight for the fans in general. It's a great fight. We want to see that fight too. But in terms of legacy for John, again, it is up to the athlete. It's not my choice as a journalist, as a backseat fighter, literally. This is me backseat fighting and telling or advising somebody how to direct their career when I have no experience of what it's like to be the pressure, to face the pressure of being a 17-time world champion in one of the hardest sports of all time. But I do believe that he has to fight Tom Aspinall. But coming back to the main discussion point, that doesn't mean because you think he should fight Tom Aspinall that you can be so obscene and so insulting, or feel so... The problem is feeling so comfortable acting like that when you would never do that to his face. And so, yes. Do I believe that Jon Jones should fight Tom Aspinall? Absolutely. Dana White believes that. Majority of the MMA community believes that. But I do not believe that allows people to cross the line, and a reality check is needed. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. I'm really, really excited for UFC 309 this weekend. I believe this is going to be an amazing card. We might see some upsets. And yeah, just get ready. Strapping in. I'm very, very excited. I will have an episode on Monday with both the fight reactions and instant reactions to what I saw on the Saturday night. And we'll go over and analyze the results. And of course, this week, or next week rather, we have an interview with Joshua Onworthy fighting at Cage Warriors 180 in London tomorrow night, Friday. And we'll be able to talk with him on the Monday. So just watch out for that. And thank you guys so much for watching. And stay tuned for the next episode of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. Subscribe, like, comment, and I'll see you next time.